I believe that the discourses used in mainstream Australian media are supporting a political agenda based on economical rationalism, influencing institutional practices and new policies which ultimately impacts the urban physical planning of the city of Sydney. The focus of the research is on the development of the Barangaroo project taking place along the harbour of Sydney, which have seen since 2006 more than 8 modifications. Using the online resource Newsbank and Barangaroo as a key research word, I analyze here the media coverage of the last 6 months. From March to August 2016 of the 2 main newspapers from Sydney, the Daily Telegraph, owned by the News Corp Australia, which is an anti-Labour publication and often supporter of the Australian Liberal Party, and the Sydney Morning Herald, owned by Fairfax Media, which is generally and currently seen to take a politically left viewpoint. Both newspapers play an important role in communicating and framing the planned construction of the Crown Hotel and Casino on the south end of the Barangaroo Park. I analyze how the content of each article is framed using 3 concepts: the public space, the public sphere, and the economical development. For the notion of public space, I focus my attention on the use of words that portrays a physical reality. For the notion of public sphere, I focus my attention on verbs referring to the decision process. And finally, I frame the concept of economical development by focusing my attention on the use of words that characterize capitalism or assets. In this research, I observe how much each concept is used in the written content of each article, keeping in mind that mainstream media, as suggested by Caldry, might display a neoliberal view of the world which sets aside the voice for minorities, and therefore might not provide a space for social emancipation. In March, the New South Wales Planning Assessment Commission, which provides independent expert advice to the planning authorities, requires some modifications and conditions for the approval of the Crown Sydney Hotel Resort. The same month and the 2 months following, the Daily Telegraph publishes articles which only cite a few actors. The newspaper clearly frames its articles with economical development content, especially in May, when it publishes an article on the strong need of the City of Sydney for food-related outlets at Barangaroo. In comparison, the articles in the Sydney Morning Herald are very dense and cite many different actors taking part of the decision process, although both articles from March and April starts and ends by referring to the Crown. In addition, the newspaper frames an equal amount of economical development content as content related to the public sphere. But only 3 individually portrayed actors advocate for the public sphere in opposition to 5 for the economical development. In May, the Sydney Morning Herald publishes 2 articles on the same page, which discuss the Crown Casino Tower proposal. The public space is used as a leverage to raise contrary opinions. The first frames the public space in relation to the public sphere. The focus is on the lack of importance given to the size and the placement of the public space. The second article frames the public space in relation to the economical development. The design of the public space is framed here as a key element of financial profit. The second article is addressed directly to Sydneysiders, rather than to the public in general, which resonates with today's Australian politics and policy making. In June, the Crown Building and the Casino are approved by the New South Wales planning authorities. In its article, the Daily Telegraph mainly gives a voice to James Packer, emphasizing how much effort the decision process was. The tone is very positive towards the economical outcome and the space given to the public. The coverage is less imbalanced in the Sydney Morning Herald, but the article reinforces the seriousness and fairness of the decision process, framing the Planning Assessment Commission as a fair actor which took into consideration the voice of the City of Sydney, as well as the political and economical constraints of the approval of such a project. Overall, the importance of keeping some land public is de-emphasized in comparison to the financial implications for the state. I suggest ultimately that the simplified information as much as the extensive use of specific terminology brings in both cases the reader to trust the veracity of the fair decision process. In August, a new player which wasn't mentioned before is featured in both the Daily Telegraph and the Sydney Morning Herald. The Millers Point Group. The group, represented by the Environmental Defenders Office, advocates for the public space and for the public sphere, by arguing that the New South Wales Planning Assessment Commission was required under law to decide whether or not to approve the location of the Crown Sydney building. The very short article of the Daily Telegraph is almost a copy-paste of the media release from the Crown Resort, issued 1 day before. Only the name of the Millers Point Group is mentioned, without any description. The simplified frame of the legal case de-emphasizes its importance and highlights the disdain towards the Millers Point Group, which is depicted as a non-relevant actor. In comparison, the Sydney Morning Herald gives the event more importance, though the Middlesbrough group is only mentioned towards the end. In the light of how the Sydney Morning Herald has been favoring economical development content in the previous months, it is interesting to observe how the newspaper is framing the new actor. The Middlesbrough group is simply referred here as an entity formed of local community groups, which primary concern is actually about the public accessible open space on the foreshore. The framing de-emphasizes the broader social and economical implications of the legal case. The way actors and events are framed impacts the framing of the idea of public space and public sphere. Neither of the newspapers question this framing. Far from posing an overt challenge, they encourage the reader to take the construction of the casino for granted. The story contains no ethical assessment of the importance of the access to the waterfront, and there is a total omission of the moral nature of having a casino being built in the center of Sydney. Instead, both newspapers highlight the economical gain of such an entertainment place without giving a relevant voice to minorities. Ultimately, it is revealing to observe that social actors advocating for the public sphere are overall being underrepresented. This lack of diversity of actors and opinions can ultimately influence the decisions related to the physical reality of Sydneysiders.